The views and opinions expressed on the following program may not necessarily reflect the views of the staff, management, or board of Hope Media Group and KSBJ. It's what's happening around us, in our town, suburb, city, in our community. It's Community Beat with Kim Kasi McKee on 89.3 KSBJ.
Well, hello and welcome to Community Beat, where we're keeping you tuned into the topics that are impacting our local communities and helping them to thrive. I'm your host, Kim Kasi McKee, Senior Director for Community Relations for KSBJ. Today, we'll be talking about a topic that is near and dear to my heart. That is Houston's homeless. And my guest is well equipped to speak to us today. Nichols is the president and CEO of Houston's Homeless Coalition. Well, hello, Mike, and thank you so much for joining us.
Kim, I am honored to be here and to discuss this important topic with your listeners, and hopefully I can learn from you, and we'll have a chance to learn what's going on in Houston, Montgomery, and Fort Bend counties in our effort to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-reoccurring.
Oh, I love that. Your efforts to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-reoccurring. I love that. Well, Mike, my first job in the real world was working for Star of Hope, Mission for the Homeless. And it was during that time that I developed such an awareness for the face of the homeless, or the faces of the homeless, and such an awareness of ways to help versus ways that could hurt with the problem. And also just such a love and compassion for people who many times have fallen through the cracks for a myriad of reasons.
First of all, I want to say Star of Hope is a terrific partner of ours. They're one of the more than 100 partners in nonprofits, government service agencies, and other entities that help us make homelessness rare, brief, and non-reoccurring. They do a great job, and we're very indebted to their staff and to play an important role in our homeless response system. Secondly, it is a topic that is very important to a number of people. We are saddened and even frustrated when we see people on the streets without a safe place to call home.
Yes.
And what I want to leave the listener today with is this is a solvable problem. We have many problems in our community that are unsolvable, but this is a solvable problem.
That's encouraging. I know one of the responses that we get a lot, especially when people see veterans on the streets. They, our thoughts are, how in the world can this person end up homeless after having served our country? And we definitely want to be able to educate as to some of the reasons that people become homeless and some of the healthy ways that we can be involved to make a difference. And before we get so far up the road, share a little bit with us about the Coalition for the Homeless. Sure. How did this coalition come to be?
Sure. In 1984, the group that we call the Three Amigos, that's Reverend Bill Lawson, Rabbi Sam Karff, and Archbishop Frenzia, got together and said, we need to do something to help people experiencing homelessness. And they formed the Coalition for the Homeless. This is our 40th anniversary as a coalition.
Wow.
But it wasn't until 2011 that the coalition really began to make a significant difference. In 2011, Mayor Anise Parker, along with philanthropists led by the Houston Endowment, business people led by the Central Houston Authority, and government entities got together and said, we can do something better. The Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development said Houston is one of the worst cities in the country in homelessness. And what are you going to do to make it better? Simultaneously, under President Obama, the Hearth Act was signed. The Hearth Act said HUD should give funds to the community as opposed to many different organizations. So with all that, the decision was made in our community to do a few things. The first thing was there'd be a central entity to be to make the request for federal funds. And that was chosen to be the Coalition for the Homeless.
Okay.
The second thing was to start a continuum of care steering committee made up of government funders, adjacent systems like justice, education, and health. And they chose the lead agency, again, the coalition. That was 2011. Since then, a few other decisions had been made. One was that everyone experiencing homelessness would be assessed by assessment individuals, and they'd be ranked based on vulnerability.
Okay.
Vulnerability, sadly, means most likely to die. Then the decision was made that the most vulnerable people would be housed first. Not the people most likely to succeed, but the most vulnerable people.
Okay.
And then a decision was made that we would work with the nonprofits so they wouldn't be stepping on each other's toes, and that we'd have people to do the right jobs to get people housed. So what happened since that date, 28,000 people experiencing homelessness have been housed in permanent housing.
Excellent.
And since that date, the success rate has been over 85% of those people stay out of the homeless response system for more than 2 years. And so it's been quite a remarkable run of success. And the coalition is the lead agency of 100 different service providers and funders. We're the ones who coordinate the services, who help coordinate assessments to make sure they're done correctly, and then bring the money into the city. Our annual funding from HUD has increased from $25 million a year for Houston, not to the coalition, but to our service providers, to $45 million per year. And that's clearly not enough, and we'll explain how we and what we've done to house other individuals.
Wow. This is some great information to learn today. We're speaking with Mike Nichols. He is the president CEO of Houston's Homeless Coalition, if you're just tuning in. So we hope that you will have an opportunity to learn more about the breadth and scope of homelessness in our city and ways that you can make a difference. So what I'm hearing you say, Mike, is that the coalition really is the more of a facilitating organization, an umbrella.
It's even different than that. It is the best metaphor that I've found for it is the airport. The nonprofits are the like the airplanes and the airlines that really support those individuals experiencing homelessness, that lead them into housing.
Okay.
But without the airport, you don't have anyone doing the strategy.
Gotcha.
You don't have anybody doing the guiding. You don't have anybody doing the planning.
The facilitation.
That's right, the facilitation. So it's more, I think it's when somebody says, well, you're just an additional bureaucracy. The answer is not at all. We're really the ones who go out and set the strategy, bring the dollars in, keep everybody moving forward, because there are ups and downs.
Sure.
You mentioned veterans. I just want to add to veterans.
Please, yes.
Veterans has been a real focus for the coalition and for our community. And the remarkable part is when a veteran presents himself or herself, and that's whether they've been honorably or dishonorably discharged, within 30 days, they can have housing and they can be in permanent housing. That's our commitment, and that's our success rate for people who are veterans.
Wow. And when you say present themselves to one of the agencies.
And are assessed. That's correct.
Okay.
The second thing I think is so important, Kim, to recognize is what do we mean by housing? What do we mean by permanent housing? There's a lot of misunderstanding about housing first.
Right.
And so what I want to make sure everybody understands is think of a tripod, a table with 3 legs. Permanent housing has to have 3 legs.
Okay.
The first thing it has to have is a real place to call home. Not a tiny home, not a shelter, not a place that has a lock and a key and a lease to that individual's name. And air conditioning and heating, because in Houston you have to have that.
Yes.
And a kitchen. And so that's the first leg. And that means who do we have to talk to about that leg is the landlords of Houston. Tonight there are 9,000 people who are in permanent supportive housing, all of them thanks to landlords who have allowed our folks to live there. The second item is funding for that lease. Most of that funding comes through HUD vouchers given to the Housing Authority, and you have to have funding for that lease. Some of the funding is for a year or two, or some is for multiple years, depending on the individual and their vulnerability. And the third item is funding for support services, not just volunteers coming in and helping these individuals, but case managers who are trained and paid to work with these individuals. And they work through a number of nonprofits like Star of Hope, Career and Recovery, Search, Avenue 360, New Hope Housing, but they are paid to do that. Mm-hmm. And that really is the secret behind our sauce. And that's one of the things that even with the most vulnerable people who come into housing with drugs and alcohol problems and mental health problems, they begin to do better. The case managers make sure they get to Harris Center for Mental Health Help and through the recovery centers for drug and alcohol help. But the first step has been get them in safe housing, and then everything else begins to move forward positively.
Thank you for sharing that, because many times you do wonder if some of the people that you see on the street, if they get into a house, into some housing, how can they maintain that in their state?
And it's case management. It is making sure they begin to have some income, some through work, some through Social Security disabilities if they are disabled. Many people we see on the streets don't have a ID, have access to benefits, but don't know how to reach those benefits. Food is an important issue, but here in Houston, we do have such great food pantries in the Houston Food Bank that it's really a matter of getting the folks to the right places. But until they have a place to call home, it is impossible for them to move forward.
Sure.
Kim, every year the coalition does a point-in-time count. It's like a one-moment photograph of Houston, of how many people are housed, how many people are living in places not for human habitat, how many people are in encampments, how many people are in emergency shelters, how many people are in transitional shelters. And last year, that count was about 3,200.
Okay.
About 1,600 people living in transitional or emergency shelters, and about 1,600 people who are living on the street.
Okay.
Most of those individuals were men, and sadly, many of those individuals are African Americans. And that gets you to the big point. The coalition doesn't have control over the inflow of people who are experiencing homelessness.
Sure.
Our studies show that more than half are purely economic, lost jobs. Others are when you're thrown out of your home for one reason or another. Domestic violence is a big issue. People coming out of the criminal justice system with no access to jobs or places to live because of discrimination. And it's a real problem. We cannot solve poverty. That is not our job.
Sure.
But our job is to stay focused on those people who are either living on the streets or living in these shelters. And I believe that it is solvable. It is just a matter of having the funding in the right places. Sometimes it's not more funding. It's just funding in the right places.
Sure.
Give you an example on that. Some of your listeners are worried about their taxes. And they've just got their assessment in their county taxes. Harris County did a survey that said that for an individual to be living on the street cost Harris County taxpayers more than $90,000 per year.
Wow.
I think that's a little high. Our national averages are $40,000 or $50,000 a year. All this is paid for emergency health care mainly by you, the taxpayer. About 3,000 people in the Harris County Jail, about 30% self-identify as having been homeless. That cost about $35,000 a year to taxpayers.
Wow.
The coalition and its partners can put a person in permanent housing, again, three legs, a real place, funding for the lease, funding for the services, for about $18,000 a year.
Wow.
All of that is federal. Difference. All of that is federal funding. So it's spread about over all the people of the United States, not just you, the taxpayers. So it is just a matter of moving those funds here and out of all the dollars being spent on emergency health care, all the dollars being spent on people, keeping people in jail.
Right.
And if we could do that, it'd be great. during COVID, we had a remarkable experience.
Mm-hmm.
St. Joseph Hospital called me and said a person experiencing homelessness was leaving, and he had been treated for COVID and still had it. This is day one of COVID, March 13th, 2020.
Wow.
The reason I know that is because my granddaughter was born on that day.
You'll never forget that.
And I said, well, that shouldn't be my problem. Why don't you call the healthcare providers?
Mm-hmm.
And they said, we're overwhelmed. So I called Harris Health and other folks, and they said, we're overwhelmed. And I thought, well, what are we going to do? So I called the folks who I know at the city and the county, and I said, let's have a Zoom meeting. That was my first Zoom meeting, too.
Good for you.
And we sat down and said, what do we need? And we said, we need a place to house people who have COVID. We need some outreach to give people materials to protect themselves. And we need to open up more shelters because the other shelters had closed down. Star of Hope said we're not going to take any more people because of the outbreak.
Yes.
And so what we did is we did all three of that. And after a month, we went, this is really expensive.
Mm-hmm.
And they said, well, what's your other plan? I said, let's house people.
Okay.
And the city and the county came up with $59 million. We went out and raised another $7 million from our community partners, from business people, from philanthropy. And during that time, with those fundings, more than 10,000 people were either housed or diverted from living as homeless.
Wow. That's awesome.
What it shows is that it's not that much money.
Mm-hmm.
It is really a matter of focusing those dollars on the right place. And I don't want to underestimate the impact of private philanthropy and people who donate, because government money is hard to work with.
Mm-hmm.
And it's of different lengths and widths and has all these restrictions. So what we use the private dollars for, folks who give money to the coalition or to our nonprofits
mm-hmm.
who work with us, we use those dollars to supplement and braid where public funding falls out.
Mm-hmm.
And again, it's about 10 or 15% of we need those extra dollars to work where the public money falls out.
Okay. If you're just tuning in, we are speaking with Mike Nichols. He's the president of Houston's Homeless Coalition, and we're talking about homelessness in Houston, and he's really educating us to the breadth and scope of the issue in our city and also what's being done to help. And I've learned a lot, and it's been encouraging. Would you say, Mike, that homelessness in Houston is getting better or worse?
At this point, I think it's about neutral.
Okay.
And the reason I say that is with the increase in rents,
okay,
with the downturn in the economy, and with the impact of the COVID protections going away, there is a significant inflow into people experiencing homelessness. The other side is, I think, the homeless response system in Houston, again, these 100 agencies in government, have done a remarkable job in housing people. So the end results is going to be probably it stays the same for now.
Sure.
But as we have to work to keep this system in place, as we have to encourage government funders to keep focusing on this, it would be a major problem if it stopped. But there are lots of things that can be done. Most other states have what we call Medicaid expansion.
Okay.
Sadly, Texas has not done that, and they've given out $10 billion in federal funds because of some silly political reasons.
Mm-hmm.
Other states use Medicaid expansion to house people experiencing homelessness who are disabled, who are sick. It's a great use of these dollars.
So tell me, how can I help people experiencing homelessness? Many times we pull up to the stoplight and we see that person or that family, mm-hmm. and our heart just bleeds for them. What can I do as an individual?
It's very difficult. First, let's talk about that person on the street.
Yes.
I am not an expert in people experiencing homelessness. I am an expert in housing people and bringing government money in.
Sure.
But what we know about people who are asking for money on the street is that about half are homeless, and the other half are desperately poor.
Okay.
And it's both terrible.
Sure.
Many people on the street have housing, but maybe they live unstably housed. Maybe they live off Social Security disability that hasn't increased in decades, $721 a month, and they give that money to a boarding house for food and somewhere to live, and they need money for a hamburger, a cup of coffee, whatever they happen to need.
Mm-hmm.
That's about half and half.
Okay.
But I'm not saying don't give money to people. It's just recognizing that this is an issue that is broader than homelessness.
Sure.
As far as we're concerned, we love to have volunteers. Our nonprofit service providers love volunteers. The coalition has a policy of asking the volunteer what they want to do and trying to make it specifically for them.
Mm-hmm.
Other ones have bigger and better programs for volunteers, so I think that's great. Funding is important. Funding is very important. For every dollar that someone gives the coalition, we bring in more than $50 in federal funds. Obviously, Star of Hope, Career and Recovery, Search all do such great work and need private funding also. So those are the two things, volunteering, private funding. As far as individual help, I think that's great. And I can't, when I drive by a family and my granddaughter's with me, yes, I'm going to give them something.
Sure.
But I do it really for my benefit.
Sure. I understand.
And for my granddaughter's benefit, but recognizing that it takes a coordinated strategic effort to end homelessness. And we can do that in Houston. We cannot, sadly, in poverty. We could really move forward having a better safety net provided by the government, like other countries, Japan, Scandinavia, where they have very little homelessness.
We've been talking with Mike Nichols, who is the president CEO of Houston's Homeless Coalition. And if you're just tuning in, we hope you're learning some things that will help you as you think about, pray about, want to do something about homelessness in our city. One of those things I learned about working with Star of Hope several years ago is the importance of people connecting with such agencies. That's a gift that can keep on giving, being able to support those organizations in our city that you've talked about, such as Star of Hope, Search, and Houston. I mean, so many centers that are helping people to have more of a holistic approach to getting back on their feet so that they won't end up on the street again. And you mentioned earlier how that may require some case management.
Absolutely.
To help deal with some of those underlying issues that they may be dealing with.
There's an issue that people say, well, why are people homeless? And I again say, I'm not an expert in people experiencing homelessness, mental health, drugs. But in the end, it's poverty and all the results of poverty. And we have, as I said, broken systems in foster care and our health care. But what we do here is we have a systematic approach to bringing the people who are most vulnerable into housing, and it's successful. There are a couple of other items I want to make sure I mention. One is we are indebted, the system is indebted to the work of Harris County and the city of Houston. We couldn't do this work without those folks working with us. And that's important for everybody to recognize, because as we go into political season, we want to make sure those political folks are thinking about what they can do to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-reoccurring, and continuing these important programs. Secondly, we can be proud of Houston and Harris County and our surrounding areas because we are the leader in the country in solving this problem. People from all over the country come and see what we're doing in Houston and learning from us. Our most recent positive successes are in the area of decommissioning encampments. If you drive by Minute Maid Park,
yes,
you will have seen in the past literally hundreds of people living under the bridges.
That's right.
Today, there have been far fewer because of our efforts in our programming to move people into housing.
Okay.
More than 50 people were moved last month into housing from the Chartres area.
That's
and
awesome.
More than 70 were moved in the Emancipation area. But there's a program to do that. The program is you got to have the housing.
That's right.
You got to have the support services. One of the things that have helped us in this is the city of Houston and the coalition helped remodel a school into a navigation center in the 5th Ward. People were very worried about that and saying, why are you putting in the 5th Ward? And there were lots of concerns. Now it's 2 months later. I believe the community is very happy because with that, the city helped bring in Harris Health, and there's now a health facility in the Navigation Center open to the community. There's a new park and an improved park. So overall, it's good. We also focused on the Fifth Ward first to house people who are experiencing homelessness. The Navigation Center sleeps about 80 people. It's a low barrier center where people can bring their partner, their pets, their stuff. And it's been very positive, but it is not a shelter. So to go to the center, you have to be in the housing referral system.
Okay.
You have to be in the housing referral system. And the idea is that you're going to stay there 30, 60, 90 days until you get your housing. And it's just a temporary, but it is not for anybody permanent. And if we have to continue to have that housing. Again, I want to shout out to our landlords in Houston and developers who've had the courage and responsibility to take on these folks and bring them in because, again, 15% of the people have a lot of trouble.
Sure.
85% are great tenants. So is that a concern? I think that's a pretty good record. I'm not sure it's not the record for everybody else.
Yes.
But it is a good record.
And it gives these people some immediate relief.
Unbelievable.
That's awesome. So what resources, books, articles would you recommend to a person that wants to learn more about the issues of homelessness?
A fellow named Desmond wrote a book called Evicted. It was a Pulitzer Prize winning book. It's a terrific book. He also has an excellent article in the New York Times on poverty. And one of the things we use the word people fell into poverty.
Okay.
It is a sad truth that it's expensive to be poor. You end up paying more money when you cash a check. You end up paying more money for health care. You end up paying more money for everything.
Yes.
And it's expensive to be poor. The system is not set up to protect people who fall into poverty. So that's one thing. It's a great book by a guy named Desmond. I'm very fond of a novel right now called Demon Copperhead by Barbara Kingsolver about Appalachia. And it's a terrific novel. It's fiction. The New York Times had a beautiful article last June on Houston and the success we've had. LA Times wrote an article that said what Los Angeles could learn from Houston.
Okay.
On homelessness. So
that's great.
These are interesting articles. We have a website. There's one website called The Way Home, which is our website for the whole homeless response system, or a website for the Coalition for the Homeless of Houston, Harris County, Montgomery County, and Fort Bend County.
My next question, I believe you just answered. Where do we go to learn more about the coalition? What is your website?
To learn about the coalition, our website is www.homelesshouston.org. And it's a really fascinating website, and it's something you want to spend some time on as you learn about this program.
Wow. Well, this has been extremely informative, Mike. Hats off to you and your team. Is there anything on the horizon for the Coalition for the Homeless that you'd like to share before we wrap up?
What's on the horizon for us is that in December of 2024, much of the federal funding that we've had from COVID will go away. And we really need to find other government funding that can support this effort. Now, we'll continue to be able to house those 9,000 or more people who are currently housed. But again, the inflow of people experiencing homeless will continue to exist, and we want to do what we need to end homelessness in Houston, to make homelessness rare, brief, and non-reoccurring. And you know what our vision is, Kim?
What is
our
that?
Our vision is that everyone will have a safe place to call home. That is something our country can meet. We have done a good job with food and making sure that hunger is a lesser problem. We can do the same thing with homelessness. And with that, this is the amazing part. We don't have to have more money. We have to have money in the right pockets.
Well said. Thank you so much, Mike, for joining us today. Mike Nichols, president of the Coalition for the Homeless. Again, to learn more about the coalition, go to homelesshouston.org. That's homelesshouston.org. Thank you, Mike, for joining us today and for the wonderful work that you and the coalition are doing. And our prayer is aligned with your vision that everyone in this city will find a safe place to call home.
Thank you for being here. It's been an honor. And I want to thank your listeners for being interested in this area and committed to making a difference.
Awesome. Well, God bless you. And as always, thank you to our wonderful audience for joining us. And we hope you'll tune in again next week for another edition of Community Beat. I'm Kim Kasi McKee on 89.3 KSBJ.
Thanks for joining us for Community Beat with Kim Kasi McKee. Join us every Saturday morning at 5:30 on 89.3 KSBJ.